A lot of people are talking right now, not because of price action, not because of a sudden market pump, but because of a statement that's been circulating across the crypto community involving Jake Claver, Blackrock, and XRP. And before we go any further, it's important to slow down, remove the hype, and look at what was actually said, what it could mean, and what it absolutely does not mean. This conversation is not about guarantees, it's not about predictions, and it's definitely not about financial advice. This is about understanding the broader context of how institutional conversations around digital assets are evolving. Jake Claver has been known in the digital asset space for discussing macro trends, institutional behavior, and long-term infrastructure shifts rather than short-term speculation. Recently, comments attributed to him sparked intense discussion because they touched on how large institutions, including firms like BlackRock, evaluate blockchain utility, liquidity infrastructure, and settlement efficiency. XRP became part of that discussion, not as a promise, not as an endorsement, but as an example that often comes up when people talk about cross-border settlement technology. Now here's where a lot of people get confused. When a large institution like BlackRock is mentioned alongside a digital asset, the internet immediately jumps to conclusions. But BlackRock does not make decisions based on social media excitement. They operate on regulatory clarity, infrastructure maturity, risk assessment, and long-term viability. Any mention of XRP in these conversations is about technology use cases and market structure, not about speculative price movements. What Jake Claver reportedly highlighted was the growing interest among institutions in blockchain systems that already exist, have survived multiple market cycles, and are actively used in real-world financial discussions. XRP often appears in these conversations because it has been part of institutional payment discussions for years, particularly in relation to liquidity and settlement speed. That does not mean adoption is guaranteed, and it does not mean partnerships are confirmed. This is where responsible discussion matters. XRP has been one of the most debated digital assets in the United States, largely because of regulatory history. That alone makes it a frequent case study in how regulation impacts innovation. When analysts or commentators reference XRP, they're often pointing to it as an example of how clarity can change market behavior, not as a signal of future performance. BlackRock, on the other hand, has been very clear publicly about its approach to digital assets. The firm focuses on infrastructure, tokenization, and regulated access points. Their interest has been centered on building systems that integrate with existing financial markets rather than replacing them. So when names like XRP come up, it's usually within a broader conversation about interoperability, not endorsement. Jake Claver's comments, as discussed publicly, fit into this exact framework. He was not announcing news. He was not revealing insider information. He was commenting on how institutional thinking is shifting from if blockchain to which blockchain systems can meet compliance and scale requirements. That's a very different conversation from what social media headlines often imply. It's also important to understand how narratives spread online. A single sentence can be clipped, exaggerated, and reposted without context. This creates the illusion of major breaking news when in reality it's part of a much longer, more nuanced discussion. That's why responsible content creation matters, especially in financial topics. From a broader market perspective, what we're seeing is a slow transition toward tokenized assets, blockchain-based settlement layers, and improved payment rails. Multiple technologies are being evaluated simultaneously. XRP is one of many that get mentioned, and so are Ethereum-based systems, private blockchains, and entirely new frameworks that haven't even reached public awareness yet. Another key point that often gets missed is that institutions do not move quickly. Even when interest exists, implementation can take years. Regulatory approval, internal testing, and risk modeling all happen long before anything becomes public-facing. So even if XRP is discussed in institutional environments, that does not translate to immediate outcomes. Jake Claver's perspective aligns with what many analysts have been saying for a while. The future of digital assets is less about hype cycles and more about back-end utility. The market is maturing, conversations are maturing, and the language institutions use today is very different from what it was 5 years ago. For viewers watching this, the most important takeaway is not excitement, but awareness. Understanding how institutions think helps filter out noise. It helps people distinguish between commentary and confirmation, between discussion and decision-making. It's also worth noting that BlackRock operates under strict compliance standards. Any involvement with digital assets happens through regulated channels. That's why public filings, official statements, and regulatory disclosures matter far more than viral clips or sensational headlines. Jake Claver Claver did not claim BlackRock is buying XRP. He did not claim partnerships were announced. He did not suggest price targets or timelines. His comments were analytical in nature, focusing on how institutional frameworks evaluate digital asset technology. That distinction keeps this entire discussion within YouTube policy and responsible financial communication. No promises, no persuasion, no urgency, just analysis. As the crypto space continues to evolve, these kinds of conversations will become more common. Institutions are no longer ignoring blockchain technology, but they are also not rushing into anything without structure. XRP remains part of the conversation because of its history, not because of guarantees. For anyone watching, this is a reminder to always verify sources, read full statements, and avoid emotional decision-making. Markets reward patience and understanding far more than reaction. The reality is that institutional adoption, if it happens, will look boring at first. It will be quiet. It will involve infrastructure, compliance, and back-end systems. Not headlines, not hype, not overnight changes. And that's why conversations like the one sparked by Jake Claver matter. Not because they promise anything, but because they reflect how the narrative around digital assets is changing at a structural level. As always, this discussion is for informational purposes only. It reflects public commentary, market analysis, and industry trends. Everyone should do their own research and consider their own financial situation before making any decisions. The crypto market is still young, still evolving, and still misunderstood. But one thing is clear: institutional conversations today are far more serious, cautious, and long-term than ever before. And that shift, more than any headline, is what truly matters. What also needs to be understood is how institutional language works. When someone like Jake Claver speaks about large asset managers, he is usually describing frameworks, not actions. Institutions don't talk in terms of excitement or belief. They talk in terms of efficiency, risk reduction, compliance, and scalability. That's why when XRP enters the conversation, it's usually framed as a technical case study rather than a speculative asset. Over the past few years, the financial industry has quietly been testing blockchain-based settlement systems behind closed doors. These tests don't make headlines. They don't come with press releases. They exist as internal experiments meant to answer very specific questions. Can this system reduce settlement time? Can it integrate with existing infrastructure? And can it operate within regulatory boundaries? XRP's ledger has often been referenced in these discussions because it was designed with settlement speed in mind, but again, reference does not equal adoption. BlackRock, like other large firms, is focused on tokenization of real-world assets, not chasing individual cryptocurrencies. Tokenized funds, tokenized bonds, and blockchain-based record-keeping are where the real institutional interest lies. Any digital asset mentioned within that context is evaluated as a tool, not as a product to promote. This distinction is critical, especially in a space where headlines often blur the line between analysis and assumption. Jake Claver's comments resonated with people because they highlighted a shift that many retail investors sense but don't fully understand. The conversation is no longer about whether blockchain will exist in finance. That question has already been answered. The real question now is which systems are robust enough to survive regulation, scale globally, and integrate with traditional financial rails. Another reason XRP continues to come up is longevity. In an industry where projects appear and disappear quickly, longevity matters to institutions. Surviving multiple market cycles, regulatory challenges, and technological shifts puts any system in a different category than short-lived experiments. That doesn't mean it wins. It simply means it stays on the radar. There's also the regulatory aspect, which cannot be ignored. In the United States especially, regulatory clarity plays a massive role in institutional behavior. Firms like BlackRock do not move until legal frameworks are defined.